Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Steven Universe Retrospectives. And today we're going to be discussing episodes 109 and 110 of Steven Universe, Onion Gang, and Gem Harvest. Now, like with Bismuth, Gem Harvest is a 22-minute episode, so like when I talked about Bismuth and Steven vs. Amethyst, I'm going to be separating this video into two sections. One section talking about the 11-minute episode, and the other section talking about the longer episode. So just giving you a heads up. So yeah, first let's get to Onion Gang, and this one is pretty much filler because if you can't tell by the title of the episode, it's an onion focused episode. Basically, it turns out that Steven's been hanging out with Onion more often, and basically how things typically go is that they just spend some time of a day goofing off, doing things that Onion likes, and Steven apparently narrates it as if this is a show about Onion's life and everything that goes on with it. Basically, it's their way of trying to create some form of equilibrium between the two, and Steven creating a sense of normalcy, which I kind of get. He has spent more time with Onion and has gotten a better grasp of how to deal with him. So I do kind of like that. This does feel like a somewhat natural progression of previous episodes that we've seen with Onion, like stuff with his dad, or when Steven went to go see him when he and Amethyst met Vidalia, and so on and so forth. So I do like that this kind of showcases how Steven and Onion have been kind of sort of hanging out after this. So I do like that. But what kicks off the plot for the episode is that when Onion comes over to Steven's house, at first Steven thinks that Onion wants to come into his place and just, hang out and goof off and all that jazz, but instead Onion wants Steven to go with him. And Steven, well, first doesn't really know what to do. Onion just kind of takes his hand and brings it and kind of pulls him along to go to a specific location, which Steven at first doesn't know where it is, as at first he thinks it's his house, which they run right by it, which also has a weird scene where we see Vidalia doing a still life painting of Yellowtail, who is posing in, I think, a tasteful nude. I mean, he's not completely naked, he's wearing underwear, but he's posing. It's strange. I don't always get art. The point is, Onion brings Steven out to a clearing in the woods, and it's there that Steven actually meets up with a group of kids. All of them kind of sort of just as weird as Onion is. And yes, like Onion, they're all named after foods. There's this one kid named Garbanzo, whose gimmick is that he literally just says the word garbanzo over and over instead of speaking actual words. He has a little brother named Pinto that rides around in a little backpack that he has. There's a girl there named Squash, who, based on her facial expressions, she seems the most chill out of the group, but I can't really tell. She doesn't talk. And then likewise, there's this kid with a suit with a pot on his head whose name is Soup. Mind you, none of them actually say that's their names, aside from Garbanzo, but even then that's only his name. That's all he says, so it's kind of easy to guess his name there. But yeah, these people are Onion's friends, and like Onion, they're all a bit weird and tend to do kind of their own thing, which is just being weird, And Onion wants Steven to be a part of it, which Steven being Steven, he tries going along with it because, you know what, these are Onion's friends. He wants him to be good. He wants to do this with him because it's all good. It's for Onion. And he even admitted early in the episode that Onion tends to feel lonely most of the time, so Steven's happy to hang out with him and give him a playmate, someone that he can talk to, and so on and so forth. And basically, throughout the episode, it's just the gimmick that Steven is hanging out with Onion's friends, and they all just kind of do weird things that you would associate with Onion. Like, for example, at first it looks like they have a box car, but it turns out they soup it up so that's like an actual car, with Pinto actually having to wear one of those. Hold on one second. I'm just gonna call it a smelting mask. It's one of those things that you use when you have one of those machines that's supposed to, like, fuse things together and so on and so forth. I am forgetting words, and I know these words, and I'm forgetting them, but you know what I'm talking about. Basically, they soup up they soup up the boxcar so that it actually moves like a regular car, and then get into a fake accident with Garbanzo pretending that he's dying, which for some reason Steven believes hook, line, and sinker. Then they end up getting it. Then they all get in a giant trench coat and flash people. By which I mean they open up the coat and then take a picture of them when they freak out, so There you go. Which funny thing, one of the pictures is Garnet literally giving them a thumbs up. And then they also have bug racing, with whatever bug is the winner getting squashed. With a horned beetle that Steven picked ending up winning, and well, that's kind of where Steven draws the line. Like throughout the episode, he was kind of a little weirded out by what they were doing, but him crushing the horned beetle is kind of where he says he doesn't want to do this anymore, and he runs off. With Onion, well, actually kind of calling out to him and trying to stop him, but well, Steven goes off. And unfortunately, though, Steven doesn't really have anyone else to hang out with. As when he gets back to his house, he tries calling people or texting them, but finds that anybody that he's in contact with, well, they're busy. Connie's doing some back-to-school shopping. Petey is... Actually, I don't know what he was doing. I wasn't able to read the text he sent. But bonus, he's not available either. And Steven begins to realize that he doesn't actually have anybody he can hang out with. That he was the lonely boy, which that's kind of a common thread between both this and the next episode, which I think I might bring up at the end, or I might not. I'll just probably bring it up if I feel like it. The point is, yeah, Steven starts to feel like maybe it turned that he was the lonely one, and Onion was taking pity on him. But when Steven is kind of moping around his house doing his own thing, Onion comes in, by which I mean he bursts right through the screen door, and tries to get Steven to come with him, but Steven thinks that Onion's just taking pity on him, which Onion tries to deny, but Steven ain't listening. So Onion does end up leaving, though he does bring the horned beetle back and reveals that they didn't actually kill it. Last is when Steven sees this, he actually does feel guilty and chases after Onion, and he ends up chasing him all the way back to the forest clearing where he was hanging out with his friends, only to see that his friends are packing up. It turns out that, unfortunately, their time in Beach City is limited. Onion's friends only come to Beach City for the summer, and then after summer's over, they go home and they don't see each other again for several months. It's part of the reason why Onion wanted to see Steven now. He wanted to essentially just have one last day where he could hang out with all of his friends together, and the day's over. His friends are packing up. They give a heartfelt goodbye. They all hug Steven and Onion, and before they all go off in their souped up boxcar. But while Onion's feeling sad about them leaving, Steven does more of his narration, so to speak, and assures Onion that he's sad to see them go, but he'll always remember the good times they had together, and he can eagerly look forward to when they come back next year, which does actually cheer Onion up enough that he actually starts tearing up before he goes in and gives Steven a hug. So, yeah, that's that. So, thoughts on the episode, I guess? Okay, in terms of content, it feels very basic. Basically, like I said, the point of the episode is just that it's Steven hanging out with Onion and his friends while they just do weird shit, which is kind of the big shtick with Onion. He's a weird kid who just kind of does his own thing. There's really no rhyme or reason to what Onion does, except it's just what Onion does. He's a kid that will set a roller coaster on fire for shits and giggles. He's a guy who will rob an arcade wearing a ski mask and somehow inexplicably gets into Steven's house when nobody's looking. We don't understand Onion. He's just Onion. And this group of kids are very much like him. They're all very strange and weird and operate on their own rules. Like I said, they modified a boxcar so that you can actually drive it instead of just pushing it down a hill and seeing it go faster. Again, how did they soup it up? I don't get it. It's the baby that's actually fusing parts together. Like how? Just how? But yeah, it's just these are all clearly weird kids, and you can kind of see that they're all, no pun intended, all peas in a pod. They're all perfect together. They're the perfect little group. They have similar senses of humor. They all are kind of odd in their own unique ways, but they all complement each other in that regard too. So you can kind of see why Onion would see them as friends, which, yeah, for the most part, it's not awful. It's just weird, I guess. I will say, like with Steven, you don't really understand how you're supposed to feel throughout the episode. Like, in some cases, you can kind of just see them goofing off and have fun, because, well, some of the things they do are stuff that kids would do. When they fake a car accident and Garbanzo pretends that he's dying, like, it's clear he's faking it, but it's so obvious he's faking it, and yet Steven is the only one that actually believes it. He genuinely thinks that Garbanzo is dying, and and thinks that no, I should get an ambulance, but no, it's just a gag. Because how things go is that Pinto goes up to his brother and then just like slaps his face as if he was trying to jolt him awake. Sorry. But then likewise, and then that somehow gets better, and it doesn't. It's not till after the Garbanzo is revived that Onion has to kind of elbow Steven and lets him know, hey, this isn't actually happening. This is all a game. Like, what? Like, it makes me feel like Steven's a little too pure for these kids. Is what I'm saying. Which is weird considering that he's older than them. Although they also did try to steal his wallet in the episode. So whatever. What do I know? But basically, it just kind of feels strange. Like, there's really no rhyme or reason to the episode aside from just seeing these kids goofing off and just doing weird random shit. Although what I do kind of like in the episode is that, well, it's clear that Steven and Onion's relationship has progressed, so to speak. Like, Onion is still the weird kid, and a lot of what he does tends to make Steven feel unnerved, but it's clear he's gotten a better... It's clear that he understands Onion more now than than how he saw him in the beginning of the series. When Steven looks at Onion, instead of seeing this weird little monster that he has to kind of does his own thing, he's able to kind of work off of him. And likewise, that's a two-way street. Not only does Steven understand Onion, but Onion has a better understanding of Steven. And it's part of the reason why Onion had to elbow Steven and let him know that Garbanzo's death was all just a game. He knew that Steven would fall for it, but he just had to remind him, no, it's just a game. It's just a game. So, but likewise, when they did the bug racing thing and Steven's prize that he had to squash his bug, Onion's the only one that's not encouraging him. All the other kids are just going, and yet Onion's just kind of looking. Which, yeah, for anyone listening to this video instead of watching it, I'm making a facial expression with how he is, which is just eyes wide open, little O in the mouth, like, oh. But he doesn't make any noise, but whatever. My point is this. It's clear that Onion is wondering if Steven will even do it, because Onion knows Steven. He knows that Steven probably wouldn't have the guts to do this. He wants it, which... I kind of like that. They do have a better understanding of one another because of that. And it's showcased somewhat at the end of the episode when Steven is actually able to cheer Onion up, because this is one of the few times that I think we've ever seen Onion get emotional. Onion does have emotions, but it's always the strangeness. His expression is usually blank or just somewhat malicious in some regard. But likewise, this is the first time we've actually seen him look hurt or sad or actually expressing anything other than malice. So when he actually does tear up and smile and give Steven a hug at the end, I do actually think that's nice. I do think that's a nice little ending there that does showcase more about how Steven and Onion have kind of grown closer. But the real meat of the episode, and I think is a good point in the episode, is just kind of the ties that bind, so to speak. Throughout the episode, Steven always felt that he was Onion's best friend because Onion didn't have a lot of other people that he could play with. And then likewise, Steven learned that Onion had all these friends, and suddenly Steven feels like he was the odd man out, which I kind of get. I do understand, because I really do understand that, especially when Onion does try to go get Steven and bring him back to the group. Because, well, I have felt that, especially recently. Just the idea of being a part of a group that feels like it goes on its own beat, and that likewise you don't feel like you entirely belong in that group. That they have their own thing and you're just a guest, that ultimately they don't really need to have you around. That that the only reason they even want you around is because, well, you're the lonely guy, which I kind of understand. I do kind of get that. Not saying that that's completely tantamount to what I was just talking about myself. But I'm not going to get into my personal life right now. I'm talking about the cartoon about the kid with the magic gem in his chest or belly, whatever. My point is this: I do kind of like how they showcase that with Steven, that he feels like he was the odd one out. And what I do like is that when Onion realizes that he and his group kind of sort of unintentionally made Steven feel like he was the oddball, he's the one trying to assure him, no, we do like you, which I also understand that, and yet Steven doesn't want to listen until he realizes that Onion actually did take his feelings into consideration when he brings him back the stag beetle. But at the end, it's also kind of has some has some nice little squishy emotions. When by the end, it turns out that that Onion really does cherish Steven's friendship because, yeah, most likely 9 months of the year, Steven's the only friend he has. So I do kind of like that. It's basically I do kind of just like that. It's just kind of like it's sweet. It's the best way I can sum it up. It feels sweet, and the way they showcase it in the episode is just nice. It's clear that Onion and his gang have just kind of operate on their own beat and do their own thing, so to speak. And it's clear why, and it kind of makes sense why Onion probably would not have introduced Steven to his friends prior to this episode, because their idea of fun is a lot different than what Steven's idea of fun is. So I can understand why Onion would probably be a little hesitant to have Steven meet. But again, this is the last day of the summer, and his friends will be leaving soon. So Onion just wanted to have like one day where they could all just hang out and do their own thing. I think it's partially why when they do the things they do, Onion does not try to push Steven too far. It doesn't really we don't really get to that point until the bug races, so to speak, as the activities they do are not too out there. They're things that make Steven kind of wince a little, but never anything that there's no deal breakers till the bug race. Like when they do the whole car crash thing, he actually had car crash thing, it unnerves Steven, but Onion has to assure him, no, it's fine. It's just a game. When they do the flashing thing, it's nothing too harmful. It's just they're taking pictures of people freaking out, which it's still weird, but it's clearly not doing so. But it's not doing any harm to anyone, as it's just them liking to mess with people. It isn't until the bug thing when Steven finally hits his limit, and even then you can tell Onion didn't think that Steven would actually do it. Like he thought, "Ooh, I don't think he's having fun now." I like that. I kind of do like that. So I'll give credit where it's due. There is some nice little camaraderie there, and I do kind of like the whole ties that bind angle with the story. With Steven showcasing more of his connection to Onion, likewise Onion showcasing his connection to Steven, how Steven kind of feels among Onion's friends, then, yeah, mirroring the whole feeling like the odd man out among their group, only to learn that he really was treasured like he was, which, yeah, sometimes negative thoughts can be allowed in that regard and can easily shut out the truth that these people genuinely do want you there. So it is kind of nice in that regard, and by the end it does have a nice little squishy finale. So overall, Onion Gang is a fine episode. The ending, the stuff with Onion and Steven growing closer is nice, and the ending is a nice little squishy thing. But ultimately, the main meat of the episode is just the kids doing weird things and you just kind of have to watch. And so far, and on a whole, that's not awful, but it's weird. And since that's a majority episode, that does kind of hold it back for me. Not bad episode, but just average, I suppose. So there you go. But with that out of the way, let's move on to the bigger episode and the one that does have the 22-minute runtime, Gem Harvest. And this one is actually a Thanksgiving episode. They don't say anything about Thanksgiving in the episode, but it has all the trappings of a Thanksgiving episode. Case in point, this episode actually begins with Steven arriving at the barn. As it turns out, he was set to spend the night with Lapis and Peridot. And when Steven arrives, well, Lapis and Peridot are seemingly absent. That is till Steven looks around the barn and sees that there are a bunch of fields of corn and other vegetables growing all around them. When Steven goes in to investigate, he finds that Lapis and Peridot have begun growing vegetables. At first, Steven is of course impressed by this, and I love how they kind of do that with Peridot riding around a tractor while Lapis just kind of sitting back in a chair and controlling the hoses, which I like that. I love that. It's nice. But when Steven asks when Steven talks to him about this, it turns out the reason why they've been farming like this is because they feel lonely. It turns out that that Peridot wanted to apply her knowledge of growing gems and apply it to growing vegetables, thinking that when she grows vegetables, they'll be like making new gems. This is bullshit, by the way. Basically, anything that they grow, it's just a regular average vegetable. And when Steven has to tell Lapis and Peridot that that's how vegetables work on Earth, they don't. They just kind of deflate. Like that's actually kind of a funny thing. Like Peridot looks confused the whole time Steven's explaining it, but Lapis, she starts out all happy, like, "Hey, are we doing good?" But then when she learns that that their efforts would not yield the results they wanted, she just kind of happiness goes to, "Aww." Like I don't know why. It's funny. It's like she gives zero shits, and yet she also feels like the most innocent. Either way, yeah, that. In the way they Lapis and Peridot feel guilty that they're not going to be creating anything that's conscious or alive, so they do kind of go off to sulk, but Steven feels bad for them, so he decides to take a pumpkin seed, lick it, and stick it in the ground, and sure enough, the next day, it does grow into another pumpkin that is alive, which Lapis and Peridot think that this is the result of their efforts, but once they detach the pumpkin from the ground, it ends up running to Steven because he's its creator. Of course, it's going to naturally like him. And as such, Steven has to come clean and tells that he grew the pumpkin. And so Lapis and Peridot are still a little disappointed, but they try to cheer themselves up by marveling at their own work because they did grow some big pumpkins. But Steven's alive and it has a face. And when Steven tries consoling them by taking their pumpkin and actually carving in a face, and even dumping out all of its guts, it ends up creeping out the alive pumpkin so much that it says that it ditches Steven and goes to Lapis and Peridot because it feels safer with them. So that plotline resolved. But it's here that we actually get to the real plot of the episode, as while they're happy that they got a new member of the family, as Steven remarks that Lapis and Peridot now have a new member of the family. An airplane flies overhead and lands near the barn. And when Steven, Lapis, and Peridot go to check it out, they find a man there, a man in an aviator outfit who's freaking out about the barn, asking what the hell happened to it, what's been done to it. Hobos have taken over the barn. He wants to know what the heck's going on. And so when the trio of gems go to confront him, he sees Lapis and Peridot and calls them hobets. That being a hobo is a man's job. Although he then changes his tune because he sees all the weird things around them and thinks they're fucking hippies. It's so stupid. But at this point, yeah, Lapis and Peridot do not know who the hell this guy is, and so Peridot ends up calling attack drones, which I kind of love how they look like her Robinoids. It's funny. While Lapis ends up taking her Fisher of Water and creates a giant water fist, which even this guy starts freaking out about this and still tells him to get away from his barn, which, yeah, that makes me even wonder what the heck's going on with this guy. This is his barn? What? As such, Steven ends up calling his dad, and the gems come along because, well, Lapis and Peridot are still living at the barn, so they're kind of involved too. And so Lapis ends up letting this human go, and when Greg comes up and wants to know what the heck's going on, it turns out he knows this. It turns out Greg knows this guy, because this guy is his cousin. This is Andy, and basically and this barn, it was technically his parents. That's why he's freaking out the way he is, because technically speaking, he's got more claim to this place than Greg does. As such, we start getting a bit more about what's going on, because it turns out that Greg's not really close with Andy. Apparently when Greg decided to go off and become a rock star in his youth, he kind of left his family behind and really has not been in touch with them. And Andy, well, he actually rightfully calls him out on that, and even rightfully asks him, why the hell would you give the family barn to a bunch of these hippies, so to speak? Which Greg talks about how they're literally alien refugees, which causes Andy to go nuts and talk about how they're actually illegal aliens. Like, yeah, you can tell this guy's supposed to be the racist family member, so to speak, who's set in his ways. But basically, throughout the conversation, it is brought up that Steven is Greg's son, and Andy does kind of soften a little when he hears that, because he didn't know that Greg had a son, and so immediately upon seeing that, he immediately proclaims that he's Steven's uncle. I mean, biologically, he's Steven's first cousin once removed, but hey, let's go with Uncle Andy. Hey, what do I care? And he's actually happy that Steven's there, and he does begin asking where Steven's mother is, and even thinks that Garnet might be Greg's wife, which I kind of like that Andy knows Greg's type, because he says that Greg needs a tall woman to keep him in line, But of course, they have to drop the sad news that Rose isn't with them anymore, and Greg does apologize for bringing it up at all. And again, Greg talks about how the gems were technically Rose's family, and so because of that, he let Lapis and Peridot stay at the barn. And while Andy says, "Well, that was kind of you to do," he still tells Peridot and Lapis to hit the road because this is DeMayo property. Which, yeah, it turns out Greg's real last name was DeMayo. He changed it to Universe, which astounds Steven to no end when he hears that. But yeah, Greg is not budging, and Lapis and Peridot don't want to leave because this is their home. They're not going anywhere, and so likewise, as Greg and Andy continue arguing with each other, Andy talks about how the barn does have family history. That the Mayo family used to come up here, like, have a once-a-year meetup where they all would just meet up, talk, have a big meal, and just have a good time, so to speak. So Steven decides that what if they tried replicating that now? That if they decided to hold a big feast here and hold a big feast here like family, which, because after all, if the gems are Steven's family, that means they're technically Andy's family too. And if they have a dinner and have a good time, then Andy has to acknowledge their family and let them stay, which Andy decides to concede to, at least just for Steven's sake, so to speak. And from there, the episode has them deciding, okay, fine, we'll make a feast, and they just start using whatever materials they have. They end up harvesting a lot of the vegetables that Lapis and Peridot grew, and utilizing what they can find around the barn and recycling them into new parts, like taking the engine from a plane and turning it into a stove/oven, which ends up causing Andy to continue freaking out because it was a piece of a plane that his parents taught him to fly in. And likewise, when things just continue to get worse, when Greg pulls him aside and he tries talking about more of his family, he ends up yelling more when he learns that Greg and Rose were not technically married. And so the gems are clearly uncomfortable around this guy, but again, because he's related to Steven, they want to give him a shot and try to get on his good side. Though even Greg admitted that Andy's a stubborn mule. He won't change his mind so quickly, and when he's made up his mind, he tends to stick that way. As such, the gems decide that they kind of need to come at this from a different angle, and they do need some more stuff. They do kind of need some more stuff that they do need more things to kind of work on it. So the gems all take Greg's van and go to the supermarket to get a bunch of shit for the shindig. That was wordplay, I guess. But anyway, yeah, it does leave Steven, Greg, and Andy behind, plus Pumpkin and Amethyst, because I guess Amethyst didn't go with them. But yeah, they do get some nice little quality family bonding in as Steven and Andy are cutting the food, and Andy and Steven notes about how Andy cuts through the potatoes with using a single slice, and he reminisces about how he and I think his Aunt Barbara were put on food duty, so he's figured out ways to do it well. And they end up talking. And as they're frying the food, he does talk about how maybe it was a good idea to reuse the engine in like this, because it wasn't really doing anything, so maybe there's some use to it being recycled. And even Greg remarks that he has this fancy new plane. So and Andy admits he's flown all over the world in this thing, saw so many things, but yeah, it's also clearly lonely, as while he talks about how great it is, he also feels kind of he talks about how he kind of remarks about how there's no one up there, just yourself and all that shit, and it's clear that he really wants company, so to speak. As such, I do kind of like that they do showcase that little moment, that little human moment where he wants to be close, where he does want to try, it's clear he yearns for some form of companionship. But ultimately, the moment ends when the gems come back and just do a bunch of weird, wacky, and just showcase how weird things are. As to try and placate Andy, they decide, well, since you like marriage so much, why don't we all get married to each other? And they bring out this big wedding cake with just a bunch of brides and grooms on top of it. Or how about, if you don't like that, we can try some being born and some death with bringing a balloon and a gravestone. Like, what the hell? And of course, first, Steven and Greg are kind of weirded out about this, but Andy at this point, he just kind of gives up, laughs, and says, okay, where am I sitting? As such, they get all the food ready, and what I like is that, and from there, Andy thinks that, well, since we're doing things weird, let's cut a piece of this delicious cake around, and at first he passes it to Steven, who just kind of passes it to Amethyst, and it gets passed around the table until it makes its way back to Andy. From there, the gems just start talking, so to speak. As they start talking about how they feel like that, like it starts with a conversation of Lapis and Peridot complaining about how they didn't get things for free, or at least they had a discount at the supermarket. They talk about how they could have taken the cart, how they could have taken the cart and used it in the barn, how that would have been stealing, and how they want to start a gem war, and then Lapis and Peridot pretend to be homeworld gems, or the crystal gems had to protect the table, and thus even Lapis makes a joke about how she was trapped in the mirror, what I love is that she and Peridot are the only ones that laugh at it, while the crystal gems are clearly uncomfortable. I love that. But throughout it all, Andy doesn't really get a word in edgewise. While he tries at one point, the gems kind of unintentionally kind of speak over him. And as a result, it's clear that Andy feels like the odd one out. And as a result, everybody is thanked for their contributions to the meal, for providing the food, for driving to the store, providing transportation, for getting the food, for cutting it up, and so on and so forth. Everyone gets thanked but Andy. And when everyone realizes that Andy didn't get thanked, Peridot does give a genuinely nice speech about how with Andy arriving, he did actually kind of get this all in motion, to have them all meet up together, to actually talk with one another. And Peridot admits it feels nice just to be here and talk and share this time with all these friends and loved ones and family. So as such, everybody cheers and is happy. And then that's when Andy realizes just how much of the odd one out he is. Which nice little visual description. He looks at the cake with all the brides and grooms on there, and then his piece with a lone groom. And so Andy just kind of gets up in his chair, tells Lapis and Peridot that they can keep the barn before just leaving, going right to his plane and flying away, which freaks Steven out as he thinks, what the heck, what's going on? I thought everything was going well. And so as such, he ends up he asks Lapis to fly him out to Andy, which at first Andy freaks out about Steven being near here, but any attempt for Steven to try and talk to him, Andy keeps just ignoring him. And as such, Steven has Lapis fly him closer until she eventually throws him on the plane, which Andy freaks out about more because Steven's kind of throwing it off with his weight. But Andy admits that part of the reason why he feels out of place there. He did feel out of place there because the thing is, everything changed. Everything changed after Greg left. After Greg left, the family began splitting up, and basically everybody went their separate ways, did their own thing. People moved. People went and got their own places. They didn't have as much time to meet up like this anymore. Like, Andy admits that he was probably one of the only people in the family who tried to keep things the way they were, but ultimately it didn't succeed. The family kind of split apart and just kind of went their own ways. And as a result, Andy just feels out. Again, he's a relic of a bygone era, a time when things were right in his world, but now they aren't. And he clearly does yearn for it and having that connection again, but he doesn't know how. But he doesn't know how things can go back to the way they were. Which I'll get to my thoughts on that at the end of the episode. But Steven does make a big speech about how he does like that he's there, and how the gems are his family, but Andy's his family too. Steven's human, and Andy is one of the first connections he's had to that side of himself, and he wants to see more of that. But which does start to touch Andy. However, during the speech, Steven ends up falling out of the plane, and Andy has to go and dive in to save him before he gets hurt. And so, which causes Andy to yell at him and tell him, "Don't ever do that again. What good are you as family to me if you're hurt?" But as such, Steven does talk Andy down and gets him to go back to the barn, as he does admit he does still want to be a part of Steven's family if he wants to. Andy does fly back to the barn, and the gems do apologize if they made him feel uncomfortable, but Andy does say, "Hey, I'm sure you guys got a bunch of leftovers. Do you mind if you bring them along, since because early in the episode Steven said they don't eat." They say sure. They pack him up. Andy gives Greg a hug. He tells Steven that he'll be there if he needs him, and the episode ends with Pumpkin spitting out a figurine from the cake, and Andy thinking that that's gross. So, okay, so what do I feel about Gem Harvest? Honestly, I do kind of like it as a feel-good episode. like I said, there's a very clear analogy to Thanksgiving throughout the episode. Having a bunch of family and friends meeting up, having a big dinner, having the climax of the episode being how everyone's thankful for what everybody brought along, to so to speak. So I can understand that. I do kind of like that. But the real meat of the episode is like with the last episode, the ties that bind. In this case, with Andy. From a story perspective, I do like that we get to see more of Steven's lineage, so to speak. And I'm not talking about like on his gem side. No, this is the first time we've seen something from his human side. Now, of course, we have Greg there, who's Steven's literal paternal. He's his literal he's his paternal father, but ultimately, but when it comes down to it, that's literally Steven's only human connection to his family. The family that he mostly interacts with are the Gems. They're the people that he spends most of his time with, and any connection to the DeMeo side of his lineage is not non-existent. His dad mostly just kind of his closest connection is literally his dad, and his dad isn't even a DeMeo anymore since he changed his last name to Universe. So I do kind of like that when Steven has a chance to actually embrace that side of his family. It makes him he gets all excited, all happy, and it's part of the reason why in the climax of the episode that why he pursues Andy even though Andy ran away, because he doesn't want to lose that. He sees a new family and he wants to build something new with it. Which I also like that the Gems are trying to put their best foot forward to try and get on Andy's good side because of that. Because even they know that Steven needs that connection with his family. Even if likewise he's not technically their family, Steven is their family. So that means that by extension they gotta kind of deal with Andy. So I do kind of like seeing that, and I kind of like how things get built throughout the episode because of it. Seeing seeing the Gems and Andy kind of clash, because like I said, Andy is supposed to clearly be the old-timey slash kind of conservative slash very much slightly racist family member. The one who is set in the old ways of thinking, but also doesn't want to change. Which you kind of see showcased throughout the episode. Even when he sees that the Gems are Steven's family, he has a hard time accepting them. Even when he learns about what happened with Rose and how these people are important in Steven's life, he is still clearly creeped out by the Gems. Which, to be fair, the Gems are magic aliens. Of course he's probably going to be a little weirded out by them. Although I am going to call out some kind of moment as when Lapis captured him with her giant aquakinesis hand. At first he didn't freak out about that and instead think that they were just using hippie mind tricks. But then later in the episode when they're harvesting food, how Garnet is by literally slamming her gauntlets on the ground and causing the carrots to pop out of the ground. And that's what freaks him out a little. Why is that the weird thing and not the aquakinesis? Hell, he reacts. He even kind of gets creeped out when Amethyst shapeshifts in front of him. Again, why is that the weird thing and not the blue lady who can literally shape water into whatever she desires? I'm gonna think that maybe, just maybe, that's kind of a weird thing. And don't you dare give me the excuse, oh, well, maybe he's used to all these things because the Gems have been a prevalent part of human history for almost thousands of years. But then why get freaked out at Garnet and the Amethyst, and then when Lapis does it, it's whatever. I'm gonna call some bullshit on that. I don't care he was getting freaked out about them living in his barn. I'm gonna still wonder about the magic lady who can control water, is what I'm saying. If anything, the fact that I would be angry about them moving into my home would get me even more freaked out about the fact that she can do all this. I'd be thinking, what the fuck, man? How can you do this shit? What's going on? So, yeah, I'm gonna call some minor bullshit on that. But throughout the episode, what I do like is that the clash you can really feel the clash of these two separate mindsets. And sorry, I thought I heard something. You can really feel the clash of these two separate mindsets as they try and coexist with one another and try to tolerate one another for the sake of someone that both sides love. In this case, Steven. Andy clearly has some bitter feelings towards Greg for how he just abandoned the DeMeo family, both figuratively as he ran away, and then the name with Universe. So, and you can see that come out in several areas. While he is sympathetic towards some of towards Greg somewhat, especially when he learns what happened with Rose, for the most part he still holds a grudge against. He still kind of holds a grudge against him. But likewise, it's again Steven that helps start to kind of bridge the gap between them. As he gets to know Steven more and more, you can tell that he's warming up to him. As it's through Steven that he does start kind of warming up to some of the newer ideas that that are presented with the gems. And as when he sees the stove, sees the stovetop that he made from the engine of his parents' old plane, at first he freaks the hell out because that's a family heirloom. But then likewise, he sees Steven utilizing it and actually doing something actually very helpful with it when he uses it to cook the food. He's like, well, maybe it is a good idea that it could be utilized like that, because he clearly is trying to he's trying to get on Steven's good side just as much as the gems are trying to get on his. So I do kind of like the way that goes. It's just that the problem is Andy is too set in his ways. Like, that's kind of the thing when it comes to change. Change is hard. And the more someone is used to how things are supposed to be, the more resistant they are when things go a different direction. Case in point, we see that with Andy throughout the episode. While he does try and fit in some areas and does try to roll with things somewhat, he's clearly, for lack of a better term, a relic. He is too set in the ways of the DeMeo family before things changed. He talks about how he talks about tradition, about how things were supposed to be, versus how things are now. And as a result of that, it's left him lonely and isolated. And we even see that in the climax of the episode when everyone sits down for dinner. As he tries to be all fun and zany, like, well, since we're doing things backwards, let's get the cake. But then likewise, he feels out of place when he sees the gems talking about about the lives they've built, about the good times they've had. And he sees how happy Steven and Greg are just to be a part of that, to be members of this group, to actually just be happy. And the more they start joking around about all the times they've built up, the more Andy starts to realize just how left behind he really is. He has no one. They've built something, despite the fact that the family despite everything, he's alone. Then all these people that used to be together, they've gone off and they built new lives. They built new things for themselves. They didn't just stay rooted in one place. But then you have Andy, who kept so desperately trying to hold things together that they just slipped through his fingers. And it's by the end of the episode, it makes him realize that he was trying to attain something he was never going to get back. The family did move on, and he even kicks himself because he realizes, I could have still tried to keep a connection because, hell, I got a plane. I could have visited everyone anytime I wanted. But because he was so dead set on the old ways, it left him blind to what he was seeing before him. And throughout the episode, you see that showcased because even though, like I said, even though he meets the gems, he showcases some somewhat old-fashioned ways of thinking, calling them hobos, being sexist when he sees the gems, and like when he said that being a hobo is a man's job, or when he calls them hippies and that they're on a commune, or when Greg says that they're alien refugees from an interstellar war, he says they're illegal aliens, and then freaking out when he learns that Greg was never married, which again, these are clearly set in older ways of thinking. And while there is a part of Andy that wants to change, he's too set in his ways. To kind of give an analogy here, I'm going to talk about the Sandman comics, the Neil Gaiman Sandman comics. In those books, a titular theme with the story was that the main character, Dream of the Endless, had to change. And he did change somewhat, but the thing with the Endless is that they are literally meant to be physical manifestations of abstract ideas. So they are ageless. They've been around for thousands of years, and in those thousands of years, they don't tend to change. Sometimes they do, Sometimes they change, but other times they are very much set in their ways, with Dream being an example of that. He was very much set in his ways and was like the way he was for thousands of years until at one point he was captured and trapped for nearly 60 years, which in turn made him somewhat more compassionate towards people that he just sort of abandoned. And as a result, he does try to right the wrongs in that regard, but because he was so set in his ways, change is hard for him. And the person he is not someone that can easily embrace that change. Now, the difference here is that eventually Dream realized that the only way he can change is that the revelation is that Dream realizes he's too set in his ways, and that even if he wants to change, he can't unless he allows himself to die and then get replaced with a new Dream. Because the thing with the Endless is that when one of them dies, they're replaced by another aspect of themselves. Think about like Time Lord regeneration in Doctor Who. So another Dream take place who's actually more compassionate. But I'm getting off topic about Sandman. That's a spoiler for the comic. So sorry about I spoiled the book for you. It's a really good book. Just go check it out. But my point is this: the difference there is that Andy clearly does want to change, and by the end he does try and put his best foot forward, if just for Steven's sake, because by the end he does realize that yeah, he can change, which, although while it can be kind of heartwarming, also feels kind of out of left field, so to speak. And that's going to be kind of the big one of the complaint that I am going to have with the episode. It feels like that Steven swayed Andy a little too easily. Because here's the thing, like I said, change does not just come like that. You can't just tell someone be different, and then they'll be like, oh, I'll be different now. No, stuff like that just does not happen overnight. And so even if someone wants to change, it takes time for the changes to set in, because when you're set in your ways, a way you want to be may not be so easy to come, may not, the conclusion that you want to reach may not be it may not be as easy a path as you think. Just because you want to embrace these new ideas doesn't mean they're so easily ready and easy to accept. As I grew up and experienced more of the world, I did kind of have to start embracing more things, and it was somewhat an uphill journey. There are things because even when I was younger, I was set in my ways for a lot of things, and still sort of am. But my ideals, my biases, and my own assumptions about people did have to gradually change. And the more I interacted with people, the more I started to embrace that change, until it was actually having an effect on my point of view, on how I looked at people, on different ways of life, and so on and so forth. And basically it helped me, but it took time. Change does not just happen like that. It has to be something you work towards. And I think that the way things ended with Andy, I think it felt a little too easy. While I do kind of buy that he does want to change for Steven, I feel like that him at the end going, hey, you mind just giving me some leftovers, and then hugging Greg, I feel like that was too easy. I feel like that by the end of the episode, he should not have gone back. I think that by the end, maybe he could have landed the plane somewhere and just told Steven, I'm sorry, I've just been doing this for so long, but I want to be there for you. I want to be a part of your family, but I'm just not there yet. I'm not there yet, but call me if you never need me. I feel like the best way this could have been handled is if Andy just told Steven, if Andy and Steven just left a door open. Like, yeah, Andy is still not there yet, and he still doesn't feel like he's a part of this, but he wants to start putting his foot forward and actually start wanting to change. And you can make an argument that maybe he does that at the end of the episode. It just feels like that was too big of a step. He made too big a leap there, and was too easily accepting. But in my opinion, I think it actually would make more sense if that he knew he had to change and he wanted to change, but at the same time he said, I'm not there yet. I want to be, and I probably will get there eventually, but for now, I'm probably still going to keep my distance a little, and just kind of work at it a little bit at a time. But I do still want to be a part of your family, Steven, so call me if you need me. I feel like that would have been a more satisfactory conclusion, and probably would have still left some hope there, and ultimately still had Steven connecting with someone who is, or still having Steven connect with a new part of his family, and ultimately still make you want to see more with him, which I like that. I would have loved to see that. It's just, again, we kind of need to get our little happy ending with Steven. So only flaw in the episode. Also, I guess maybe another flaw would be that the beginning of the episode really has nothing to do with the rest of the content of the episode. So yeah, that's another thing. The stuff with Lapis and Peridot really did not serve the episode aside from them starting a garden, which eventually was utilized for the feast. So there's that. Plus, it introduced Pumpkin, who does appear in later episodes, so there you go. But otherwise, though, Gem Harvest is still a nice little feel-good episode. It is cool to see more of Steven's lineage on his human side. I like that I like the journey I love the emotional journey as Steven connects with Andy, and Andy likewise as connects with Steven. I like seeing how Andy kind of operates and how he sort of progresses throughout the episode, as he's a family member set in his ways who gradually has to learn to accept change and be better. And likewise has to realize that if he doesn't want to be left behind, he does need to improve. He does need to change his mindset and who he is in order to be a part of his family's lives and actually be included. But likewise, I feel like the biggest problems for me are that the beginning feels a little out of place, and the beginning doesn't really feel like it ties into anything in the episode aside from a few aspects, and the ending feels too mushy, a happy ending. Which again, I like happy endings. It's just that I wish that it could have been handled a little differently. Again, just leave a door open and then showcase that Andy wants to change but is not there yet. So but overall though, it's still, in my opinion, I think it's still a good episode, and I think works well for what it set out to do. So yeah, that's about it. I thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson. I hope you had a good time here. And next week we're going to be getting back to some plot important stuff. We do have a somewhat minor filler episode next week, but it does still have some nice juicy stuff. But the episode after that is definitely going to be more plot heavy, and it's going to be the beginning of another 5-episode story arc. So till then, I hope you have a good night. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I'll hopefully see you next week. Take care.